What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the Brant Partial Show. So, yeah, I mean, defensive tackles have some really good players I like. Braden Fisk out of Florida State. Braden Fisk just plays so hard, and he's got good power. It's a guy that I watched the Miami game. They really double-teamed him a lot, but when he's left on one-on-one, he has a problem. He's got good power, relentless pursuing to the ball, and he is a good tackler. So, yeah, Braden Fisk, one of the top defensive tackles in this 2024 NFL draft, seen as a consensus number 3 defensive tackle. And yeah, Fisk is just a really good football player. Started his career at Western Michigan, and yeah, a guy that just moves really well. And yeah, he's going to be good in the NFL. Jerzon Newton's another guy out of Illinois, another really good defensive tackle. Newton may be my number 1 defensive tackle. Newton, this guy is just, his power. He can certainly threaten offensive linemen with power, but the other thing that stands out about Newton is he can really, like, his counters are just so effective. Like, Newton really has some good counters. And yeah, this is a guy who he's had a good long career at Illinois, and he's got a really bright future ahead of him. And then, yeah, Byron Murphy at the top. So, yeah, I'm kind of back and forth between either making Byron Murphy my number 1 or Jerzon Newton. Jerzon Newton or Byron Murphy, those are definitely the top 2 guys at defensive tackle. Braden Fisk is kind of like, the third spot's kind of perfect for Braden Fisk because he's right behind those guys. He's not quite Fisk is not on the level of Newton or Byron Murphy. Murphy and Newton are just, they do almost everything at least at a very good level. Fisk is it's a lot of good, some very good, but I would say for almost every category, Newton and Byron Murphy are very good. Like, burst off the line of scrimmage, both very good. Power, very good. You could argue that Newton's power maybe is just good, but it's at least good. It's debatably very good. And then ability to, both of them just get off and can work through blocks so well. They both just work through traffic just phenomenal. And Byron Murphy had a really emerged this year at Texas. This was last year, not the best season, but this year had a much better season. So that was big. That was huge in regards to him becoming the number 1 defensive tackle, because you look in the summer and it was a lot of Mason Smith was a consensus number 1 guy. Jerzon Newton was the number 2, and then Mason Smith didn't have as good of a season along. You know, the LSU defense was just poor overall, so Mason Smith fell off because people forget Mason Smith was the consensus number 1 D tackle, and then Jerzon Newton rose up. And yeah, Fisk rose up. Fisk was going to be in the mix for one of the top defensive tackles, but the season he had this year at Florida State really put a stamp on him working his way into one of the top defensive tackles. But yeah, it's going to be a back and forth. It could be one of those things you talk about personal preference. It's kind of like for the number 1, the battle for the number 1 and number 2 defensive tackle is kind of like with Malik Nabers and Rome Odunze, how there's a battle for like who's the second best receiver. Some may prefer Rome Odunze, some may prefer Malik Nabers. It'll probably be that'll be similar with Jerzon Newton and Byron Murphy. It'll be kind of an NFL team's personal preference. Do you like Jerzon Newton or do you like Byron Murphy? Do you like the guy who, like, I guess to kind of differentiate them, Murphy's more of the guy who's like the lateral quickness, staying square when he's working through blocks. That's more of his game. That's what he more so excels at as far as to kind of paint a picture. And then Newton's more of the guy who can rush the pass. And then I should add, Murphy plays more of like the 0 through 2 tech. With Newton, he'll probably be more of like a 2, plays more of a 2 through 4 tech. Illinois, they had him a lot in the 4I, a little bit in the 3 tech. So yeah, with Newton, you kind of have more of like he's more going to be like almost a 3-4 defensive end. But yeah, with Murphy, a guy that's, oftentimes will be like 0 tech, 1 tech. So kind of head up over the center, just shade or in between the center and guard. So to kind of compare or differentiate their skill sets. That's the kind of the main differences with Byron Murphy and Jerzon Newton. But yeah, Newton I think can really excel in the 3 technique or the 4-eye, but he does have the capability to play the 0 through 2 technique as well. But if you're if you're asking who does it better, probably Byron Murphy plays the 0 through 2 technique better. But then that changes obviously when you're discussing the 3 and 4 technique. You didn't really see Murphy play the 3 through 4 technique a whole lot. I think sometimes they would move him almost to like a 5 technique to rush the quarter, but that was in obvious passing situations. They also did that with Newton too. But yeah, I think Newton's more of like an agile, can like is more comfortable putting himself in awkward body positions and making tackles, if that makes sense. Thing with Byron Murphy, he can put himself in those awkward body situations, but he doesn't always make the tackle. I guess what I'm trying to say, I think Newton is a better tackler. Like, if you're combining working through traffic and making tackles, Newton's better in that aspect. So, yeah, they're very close, but just probably you have to give the edge to Byron Murphy just because his speed to power is better. Like, Newton's so nimble that he did a good job of creating one-on-one opportunities because you could just, if there was a play where they were trying to double team, he could easily get by the first guy and create a one-on-one opportunity. But with Byron Murphy, it was a lot of like it was a lot of like when he took on the double, like he could beat the double teams. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know, that's close too. I might give a slight edge to Byron Murphy as far as like who can defeat the double teams in the pass rush. I don't know. I mean, I do give the slight edge to Byron Murphy, but it is really close. If you could compare, you could debate all day who's the better of those two, but I think it's one of those things where it's like the Malik Neighbors Rome Odunze debate for the second best receiver. It's one of those things like you're going to get a very good player either way, even if you don't get the top, even like say a team has Newton as their number 2 defensive tackle and Byron Murphy's off the board, that team takes Jerzon Newton. I don't think that team's going to be disappointed taking Jerzon Newton. Same can be said with the cornerback position. If a team really likes Quinyon Mitchell and he goes before Terrion Arnold and that team gets Terrion Arnold, I don't think that team's going to be super disappointed with Terrion Arnold. So cornerback position, D-tackle position, 2 of the positions where there's still kind of a battle for who's that number 1 guy. Like other position, like tight end position, it's pretty much locked up. Brock Bowers is the number 1 tight end. Quarterback position is pretty much locked up that Caleb Williams is the number 1 quarterback. Wide receiver, even though there's a debate for the number 2 guy, Marvin Harrison pretty much locked up the number 1 wide receiver debate. And then, yeah, with the edge rusher, it seems like Dallas Turner has kind of locked up that. Defensive end, there's a battle for who's the number 2 guy, like Laiatu Latu, Jared Verse. I would give the edge to Jared Verse, but I think it's close. Like, I think a team... Don't be surprised if there's a lot of NFL teams that have Laiatu Latu as the number 2 edge rusher. Like I can totally see why they would think that. I personally would have give Jared Verse a slight edge over Laiatu Latu, but if a team has Laiatu Latu the number 2 edge rusher, I can't fault them. I can see why they see that. But yeah, some other defensive tackle. Chris Jenkins, too, out of Michigan. I like Chris Jenkins. Rook Aurora, Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. Michael Hall he was one of the guys that was projected to be maybe the number 3-4 defensive tackle, be right up there. He's one of the top guys. Kind of slipped off, didn't have his greatest season. The guy that's just been kind of streaky at Ohio State. There's certainly some things he can do at a high level, but I don't think he has enough good traits to really make him to really put him in the discussion as one of these top defensive tackles. Like you've seen plays where like he's kind of one of those guys where he's like Newton, he's nimble enough where when he's in one-on-one opportunities, he can really just beat it, like make a guy look silly with like a counter, like a swim move or, rip his hands through, like he can do that. But I think Hall is less than even like Chris Jenkins, Fisk, and Newton. When he's double teamed, he's pretty much neutralized, and then there is a lot of plays where he just kind of stalls out as in one-on-one opportunities. Now I have to go back. I haven't watched his tape in a while, but that's kind of what I've seen from Michael Hall. He doesn't. There's definitely a lot of solid, good traits with Michael Hall, but he's just not as good as Fisk, Newton, Byron Murphy. He's just not as good as those three guys. I think Michael Hall, could this be a guy that's a starter in the NFL? I think absolutely. I think a lot of teams will probably give him the eventual starter label, but a guy that just didn't have he was a guy who, him and Mason Smith kind of in the same boat. They were guys that needed to have a big season this year to really take that next step, and they just didn't do it. It just didn't happen for them. And you could argue, if anything, they had a worse season, which I'm not trying to throw shade at them, but sometimes guys just don't get better, and it happens. Look at people argue Caleb Williams had a worse season this year. Now, granted, he's still the number one pick, but that's why there's a lot of pushback that Caleb Williams might not be the number one pick just because he didn't have as good a season. But yeah, staying with D-Tat, Chris Jenkins out of Michigan, T'Vondre Sweat too. T'Vondre Sweat, I think, was a guy who got a little bit. Now, before I say this, I really should watch some more tape because I got to be careful doing it. But I think T'Vondre Sweat's a guy, I talk about the Texas linebackers stood out. It's funny how, when you have a dominant defensive tackle, how the other positions on your defense magically get better, how much better your linebackers look. Because Byron Murphy, his ability to eat up those double teams, it made the Texas linebackers look so good this year. I think that was kind of the case with T'Vondre Sweat. Teams are paying attention to Byron Murphy so much that T'Vondre Sweat got some one-on-one opportunities, and he really made the most of them. So T'Vondre Sweat is a good player. He's a guy that was making a push for one of the top guys in this draft. Well, he still is a consensus number 5, 6 guy, but he was a guy that in the summer you're talking about, maybe this guy could be the number 2, 3 defensive tackle, maybe make a case for the number 1 defensive tackle, but just didn't happen for him. Didn't necessarily get worse, but had another good season, but just never, to say he got better this year, I think is a far cry. So, but yeah, Rook Aurora, it's a tough name to say, out of Clemson. And Michael Hall, Mason Smith. Those are some other names to keep in mind at the defensive tackle position. Yeah, but the offensive line, Joe Alt, consensus number 1 guy. Joe Alt, there's really not a lot to fault about Joe Alt's game. When you watch him, you look at this guy and you're just like, that's even before you even watching him plays, that guy just looks like an NFL tackle. That's what they say about NFL offensive tackle. A lot of them, guys that when they get off the bus, they're like, yeah, that guy's an NFL tackle. And obviously that, just looking at a guy is essentially not really scouting. It's scouting in the sense that you're getting an idea of their body type, but it's not, obviously you got to watch the film too. But if you didn't see any tape on Joe Alt and just looked at his body, you'd be like, yeah, that guy probably is an offensive tackle in the National Football League. So looks the part, but with Joe Alt, he certainly plays the part. And the guy who doesn't always, I don't love the way, he doesn't look like he's in the most athletic positions when he's blocking, but just the overall strength and aggression this guy has just kind of trumps that. And he is a good player. And Joe Alt, most likely the number 1 offensive tackle off the board. J.C. Latham, Olu Fashanu, other guys that'll be in the mix too. Some of the interior guys, like Tulisi Fiaga, is Fiaga a tackle guard? Some other guys in the mix, Graham Barton out of Duke, Andrew Beebe out of Kansas State's another nice interior offensive lineman. Guy out of West Virginia, his name escapes me right now, but he'll be up there as one of the top offensive linemen. Some people have him predict him to go in the first round. We will see. Yeah, fairly strong offensive tackle class. Offensive tackle, such a valuable position in the NFL. And yeah, I like J.C. Latham. J.C. Latham known for being a 5-star guy. And then Talisi Fiaga is kind of the guy that came out of nowhere. If you look in the summer, Fashino, J.C. Latham, Joe Alt, kind of the usual suspects. Some people actually predicted Joe Alt might be a top 3 pick. Now, it still could happen, but most people kind of have him going in that 5, 6, 7, 8 range, maybe top 5 to top 10 range. Yeah, some people in the summer thought Joe Alt might go as high as number 2 or number 3 in the draft. But yeah, Joe Alt was certainly in the mix of being the top offensive tackle in the summer. Same with Latham, same with Fashino. Jordan Morgan's another guy out of Arizona I liked in the summer. He was lower on the consensus board. He's really risen up. He had a nice season at Arizona. He's out of Arizona. Yeah, I mean, I like this offensive tackle class overall, I guess, to reiterate. And yeah, I think there's certainly some good players. J.C. Latham's the guy that I've watched pretty closely. Well, not necessarily tape, but just in games on TV. And just because I remember he was a 5-star, big-time recruit out of high school. I think he was he's either the number 1 or number 2 offensive tackle, and I think he was the number 4 player in the nation. So, yeah, Latham has been touted to be quite the talent for a long time. Joe Alt, I forget what Joe Alt was coming out of high school. I think, people say that stuff doesn't really matter, but I think some NFL teams look into that. Like they interviewed Howie Roseman when he drafted all the Georgia players, and they talk about guys like Keely Ringo and Jalen Carter. Talk about 5-star guys out of high school. I think there's something to be said about that because people, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of hardcore NFL scouts who say I only want to see this college tape. That's it, which is fine. But I think there's something to be I'll reiterate. I think there's something to be said about a 5-star guy coming out of high school because that just means that they to become a 5-star in high school. Some of them are crazy gifted. That's why they're 5-star. But a lot of them are 5-stars in high school just because they're mature beyond their years, even at a young age, and they just have at least a couple high-end level traits. I think that's a good point. I should hit it. I've noticed that with almost every 5-star guy, even the ones that don't really pan out to be great college players or great NFL players, they always have at least 1 or 2 very good to elite traits. I think that's why edge rushers are kind of overhyped coming out of high school because a lot of them have the burst and quickness off the line of scrimmage. A lot of them do that at a very good to elite level. The ultimate example was Jadeveon Clowney at that. Clowney could just fly off the line of scrimmage. Same with Xavier Thomas. Xavier Thomas is actually going to be in this draft. He was a 5-star out of high school. It just never really turned into a dominant edge rusher at Clemson. Was there for finished up his sixth year this past year, but you look at him and you're the guy gets off the line of scrimmage quickly, and he has just good burst. He's had that since high school, but the other traits are kind of lacking. And then with going back to what I was talking about with Howie Roseman, Keely Ringo certainly had the size at the cornerback position. That certainly was there. And the Jalen Carter, just the freakish strength overall. So that's the thing. And then with Latham kind of goes back to Joe Alt. This was a guy, I'm sure what the main reason he was a 5-star in high school is because he was a guy that when he gets off the bus, people are like, who the heck is that guy? And just to do he's looked the part from a young age. So that's why, is a guy being a 5-star everything, but oftentimes, in the case of J.C. Latham, some of the guys that have been drafted in the past few years, NFL GMs pay attention to it, and it obviously means you at least have a few good traits that set you apart even at the high school level. So New Orleans Saints are an interesting team for this 2024 draft. Not a lot of people have talked about what they're going to do. A lot of people have them taking an offensive lineman. They could go edge too. You look at New Orleans, kind of a team, kind of in the position with the Vikings. It's a pretty kind of just become an average ball club, and they're in a position where they obviously want to get the best player they can, but I guess the point I should make with the New Orleans Saints is, do they go best player available, or do they try to really fill a need here? Like, because New Orleans Saints could use another edge rusher. Like, they lost Marcus Davenport, and then Cameron Jordan's just getting up there in age, so edge rusher could be in the mix. They need some help on the defensive interior. They tried to address that in years past, and sure, they've got a couple guys that have been okay, so that certainly could be a direction they go. Yeah, defensive line, offensive line. Like the Saints, for a team for years, really strong offensive line, but their offensive line in the last couple of years kind of taken a step back. So O-line or D-line for the New Orleans Saints. That might be where J.C. Latham goes, Olu Fashanu. I actually could see Fashanu being a fit because Fashanu is a guy, he just kind of reminds me of some of the offensive linemen the Saints have drafted. And he reminds me of guys that the Saints have drafted, and he just, like, he is not the best, he doesn't move the best out of these offensive tackle, but he's a guy that run blocking, pass blocking, when he gets into a guy, he can really dominate him. And I guess since the Saints already have a pretty solid offensive line, just getting a guy who is in one-on-one situations more often than not, I think that will really make Olu Fashanu's skill set shine. So I think if, say, Joe Alt and another offensive tackler off the board, Latham, and the Saints are picking, and he's on the Fashanu's on the board, they might be like, yeah, he's not. We didn't like him as much as the other two, but Fashanu, this is a guy who we have a good core offensive line already. Fashanu's going to come in. He's probably not going to be put, if he does start, he's probably not going to be put in such tough situations because our offensive line is a pretty strong unit. So, yeah, let's go with Fashanu. Let's take his ability. Let's take his power as a run block and anchor and pass protection. So, yeah, I think Fashanu seems like a pretty logical pick. I guess just any of these top offensive tackles seems like a pretty logical pick for the New Orleans Saints. But, yeah, O-line, one of the top areas of need, or it's the position that really makes the most sense because, like, I guess even with D-line too, they took Brian Brzee. Was it last year they took Brzee? Yeah, last year they took Brian Brzee, and I don't even really know. I didn't really follow, I guess, how Brzee did this year, but. And then that linebacker, I mean, they're still pretty strong at linebacker. I mean, Pete Warner's been decent, and then Demario Davis has been good. So, yeah, New Orleans, you feel like offensive lines where they're leaning. Maybe they do look defense. I guess they could go secondary, even though that's when you look at the New Orleans Saints, secondary is not an immediate secondary, like doesn't jump out as an immediate need. But teams, you can always upgrade to the secondary. You know, the NFL has become such a pass-heavy game. Getting as many guys that can cover is always so critical. Yeah, Atlanta at number 8, you feel like they should take Dallas Turner. And then, yeah, the biggest wild card, I think, like what the Chargers are going to do, classic Jim Harbaugh. You know, a lot of people, you could argue a lot of people don't know what any team's doing, but a lot of people have no idea what the Chargers are going to do. The Chargers, one of those teams, the Chargers kind of like the Saints and the Vikings. You could say average ball club. I guess with the Chargers, you could argue they're above average roster though. But the thing with the Chargers is like, it's not a necessarily average team, but it's not a great team. Like they're somewhere locked in the middle of an average team and a great team. I think what's tough about the Chargers is I think the guy they take is not necessarily going to necessarily propel them to be a great pick or to be a great team. I think that's why the Chargers are in a tough position. Like you could argue, I guess, probably the most ideal pick for the Chargers would be Brock Bowers. But even so, like even if they do get Brock Bowers, that could take their offense to another level. But I don't think then what could they do defensively that could really help to balance that, if that makes sense. Like this is a defense that has had, I think Harbaugh will improve it. But this is a defense that has had some serious issues the last couple. Well, not say serious, but it had some issues the last couple seasons. I think Jim Harbaugh will fix that. But to me, I guess the argument against the pick taking Brock Bowers there is is it just overkill offensively? I think that's why there's always you're always torn, because the NFL draft, you're trying to, I always say you take the best player the argument, there's either take the best player or take the best available player at a position of need. So, I mean, is Brock Bowers, I don't know, I'm having trouble explaining this, but I guess, is Brock Bowers, is that just is that kind of putting your fist down and saying we are going to be really strong offensively, but we're going to kind of punt, if you will, defense this year? Now, they still could get some good defensive players in second, third round, whatever. I don't know what picks they have in the second, third round, but to me, though, the Chargers, I don't know. I guess the bottom line is taking Brock Bowers is a great pick, obviously, but is that just too much? Is that too much of a good thing offensively? Obviously, you can never have too good of offense, but also you need to kind of factor in, defense, because that's the thing. There's always the people, and I still am kind of this guy that are always best player available no matter what. But sometimes you can't be you can't be completely delusional about that. I don't know, the Detroit, I guess the Detroit Lions a couple years ago. There was an argument they should have taken, I forget what exactly the scenario is, but the Lions, you knew a couple years ago, they're 3 years ago their defense was really weak, and then 2 years ago their defense not so good. But you knew, especially last year, in 2022 season when the Lions missed the playoffs, you knew the Lions offense was going to be really good, but the defense still not there yet. And then people are talking about taking, when they were drafting prior to this year, as people talk, or, I guess the example is taking Jahmyr Gibbs. Was Jahmyr Gibbs, was that overkill? Because the Lions traded back and passed on potentially getting Jalen Carter. Was that, Gibbs helped them a lot, but would Jalen Carter, would their offense still have been good enough, and then would Jalen Carter have put their defense over the top to beat the 49ers? Look, it's it's a tough question to answer. Obviously, we'll never know the answer, but it's an interesting one to think about. But that's just kind of my back to my point with the Chargers. Just you want to get best player available, but you don't just want to you don't just want to stack one side of the ball too much or stack one position. But yeah, the Chargers, Brock Bowers makes a lot of sense also, just because they need a strong tight end. The Chargers, really, since Antonio Gates has been gone, which is, how long has it been? At least 10 years since Antonio Gates. Since Antonio Gates left, they've really been thirsting for a top-end level tight end. And I think a lot of people are just curious to see what would happen if you combine Justin Herbert with a top-end NFL tight end. So, but yeah. So the NFL draft less than a week away. So a week from now we'll be in rounds 2 and 3. So I think the question a lot of people have is, how good can Marvin Harrison be? Is Marvin Harrison going to be, I think the floor, is it crazy to say his floor could be Julio Jones? That sounds like kind of a crazy statement, but when you think about it, it's I feel like that's realistic. If you think about with Marvin Harrison, this guy has been touted the top receiver in the draft for a couple years now. So to say his floor is Julio Jones, I don't think that's crazy. I think he's got a long way to go to live up to that, but I don't think that's necessarily a crazy statement. I think he could be as good as Julio Jones. I think It's always tough with the NFL draft, though, because there's always guys that get labeled generational talent. And, like, it's crazy. Like, you look at the one draft, like, there was a few guys that, like, you look at the 2021 NFL draft, there was a few guys that kind of got that label. Micah Parsons, you could argue Jamar Sewell, Pitts. And honestly, Micah Parsons is a generational talent. We look at Marvin Harrison, like, you can give him the label generational talent, but, like, to me, I think he really is. I think he really could live up to that. So we'll see. For me, it is a bold statement to say his floor could be Julio Jones, because then you're thinking, like, then what's his ceiling? But yeah, I think Marvin Harrison has a chance to be a really good player, and yeah, it's crazy. Like, this time last year, people were talking about Marvin Harrison should just sit out this season, but he chose to come back to Ohio State and really had another great season. I think that's really a testament to his talent and what kind of competitor this guy is, because he could have just, like, this year, he could have played some games and then said something hurt in his hand and just shut it down, or he could have just played not to get injured and just, put up some okay stats. But no, he came out and had another really, really good season. So I think that's a real testament to Marvin Harrison. But yeah, looking forward to seeing how many receivers go in this draft. I think Malik Neighbors should be the second receiver off the board. How many go in the first round? I think I'm curious to see how the NFL scouts, GMs, I'm curious to see how they view this wide receiver class, because this wide receiver class is really getting pumped up by the media and fans. So yeah, a lot of people viewing this wide receiver class highly. We'll see if the NFL and the teams, the GMs, view this wide receiver class as highly. So yeah, I was taking a look at the safeties. I like Cole Bishop out of Utah. I think Bishop's a nice player. He moves well. It's interesting, like, the safety class has kind of been written off, but you look at, like, the top three guys, like Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. I've just watched highlights. You look at his game and you're like, he's a good all-around safety. You look at Javon Bullard. Javon Bullard lacks some movement skills. Like, this is not necessarily a guy that you want to trust playing man coverage. But as far as, like, hitting, aggression, competitive toughness, playing on a championship caliber team, and just a guy who also has some ball skills too, and has some fluidity in the hips. It's not like he doesn't have, like, super greasy hips, and he's not like a super agile guy, but has some agility. As far as all those traits, he has some things that are certainly to like in Javon Bullard's game, but yeah, he's lacking from a movement as far as some movement skills. So yeah, Nubin, Cole Bishop, Javon Bullard seen as kind of like the consensus top three safeties. But yeah, all three guys really solid players, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bishop's is the first safety taken. But yeah, Bullard, it could be Tyler Nubin, Jaden Hicks out of Washington State. Those are kind of the four guys I was watching today. Jaden Hicks, he's a guy that can read plays quickly too. Will come downhill, make some hits. He's got some size too. I think he's got the versatility to play deep, to drop back into coverage, and then, like Bullard, I don't think this is a guy you ideally want to play. You want to put in the nickel and have him play man-to-man coverage frequently, but can he do it? Yes. Not necessarily at a high level, but yeah, there's Jaden Hicks, Tyler Nubin, Cole Bishop. Those are four guys that are pretty good at the safety position. So yeah, I'm struggling with the defensive tackle position, because I look at like I like Jerzon Newton a lot. I like Braden Fisk a lot. I like Byron Murphy a lot. But I actually kind of retract. I love Braden Fisk, and you watch his highlight tape one of the highlight tapes on YouTube, and Louis Riddick is talking about what a competitor this guy is, and he loves football. That's kind of the vibe I get from watching tape of Braden Fisk. That's why I gave him like elite competitive toughness grade. There's some guys you watch and you just get a sense that a couple things. Number one, they just have it. They're on a mission to dominate. And number two, they are just fierce competitors. You get both of those feelings with Braden Fisk. This guy, he loves football and just loves to dominate. And it looks like he's on a mission to dominate. And like each play, he rushes the quarterback and gets off the snap as if no one's in front of him. As if he doesn't care who's in front of him. Like, who's ever in front of me, whether it's one guy, two guys, I'm going to split you, or if it's one guy, I'm going to run you over. That's just like that's just like the type of guy Braden Fisk is. He just does, he doesn't care who's going to go against. He has the mindset, I'm going to dominate. I'm going to play hard. I'm going to relentlessly pursue the ball. So that's just what stands out about Fisk's game, and I absolutely love it, and I'm all for it. And then, Jerzon Newton, just such a nimble athlete, very quick twitch guy, can move laterally pretty well, not as good as Byron Murphy, but Newton just has a great feel for rushing the passer. Like, he just really has a knack for rushing the passer, and he is good against the run too. Not to take away from that skill set, not to downplay that skill set, because I know I'm really talking about how good of a pass rusher he is, but he is good against the run as well. But it'll be exciting draft night. Like, this is one of those drafts. It seems like the number one pick is certain that it's going to be Caleb Williams with the first pick. So you're kind of picturing Roger Goodell making that first pick and saying with the first pick, Chicago Bears select Caleb Williams. So you feel like Chicago and Chicago Sports Talk Radio is ready to start the buzz of it's the Caleb Williams era. And then, so I think a lot of Chicago fans right now are thinking, we're going to get Caleb Williams number 1, and then at number 9, who are we going to take? Are we going to get a receiver to help him out, or are we going to get a defensive player? So I think that's kind of what the Bears are thinking about right now. They're thinking, we're going to take Caleb Williams, and we have a choice. Do we get him another weapon, or do we go defense? They could go offensive line, maybe Fashino, Latham, possibly Joel could slide there. But I think that's the main question is, do we get him another weapon? And because you feel like if they get Rome Odunze, now it's kind of like, now there's really no excuses for him not to, or there's no excuses that he's not in a very ideal situation. Because if they take him and then they go defensive player, you feel like that means one of a couple things, meaning they have the ultimate faith, they have faith in him, and they don't need another guy, or it's kind of like a slight test. It's like a slight test to see, can he really perform at a high level with us not allocating a bunch of resources to help him. So I think that's kind of like the two thoughts, or those are kind of like the two different debates, if you will, for why they would take a defensive player. But I think Caleb Williams is going to be a really good quarterback. I know there's a lot of pushback about how good he could be. I think he'll be a really good quarterback in the NFL. But some of the other top quarterbacks, Drake May out of North Carolina, Jaden Daniels out of LSU. Jaden Daniels with one of the biggest surges. I mean, you could argue J.J. McCarthy too, but Jaden Daniels had a really big surge up the draft boards. Like a lot of people had J.J. McCarthy, or J.J. McCarthy really surged up the draft boards. I mean, so did Jaden Daniels. So Daniels, one of the the heavy favorites to be the second overall pick to Washington. And then J.J. McCarthy, one of the favorites to go to the New York Giants, or to go to whoever trades up to that 4 spot. So that's going to be one of the things to watch draft night is who takes McCarthy. But yeah, I'm going to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Brad Parshall Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips. Till next time, peace.